The year is 1967. The movie Sing a Song of Sex hits Japanese theaters. The People's Republic of China announces its first successful test of a hydrogen bomb. Pink Floyd's first album comes out in Great Britain. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, the first brick was laid for what is to become the Avtovaz factory in Tольятти. A 5-day work week was established. And that same year, the Toyota Corporation decides to commemorate the 100th anniversary of its founder Sakichi Toyota by producing a car of unprecedented status. However, the main motivation for Toyota's management wasn't just paying tribute to Toyota-san. They were also compelled to do so by the Nissan President, which debuted 2 years before that, and which was luring wealthy and privileged clients away from Toyota. So Toyota came up with a car which they called the Century. Legend has it that the Century name was not only a nod to Toyota-san's 100th anniversary, but that it was also down to Toyota creating a car so reliable that it can last 100 years. Toyota also made a commitment to supply parts for every single Century model throughout the course of that entire time period. Whether there's any truth to that or not, we can only find out in the year 2067. Today you can still find first-generation cars on the internet, so it's too early to debunk the theory about this car's longevity. From the very start, the Century's design was based around a series of parallel lines. The Japanese are convinced that this is the foundation for an imposing and prestigious look. The first-generation car underwent plenty of changes throughout its life cycle, with updates being made to the suspension. Meanwhile, the initial 3-liter V8 was later upgraded to 4 liters. In 1982, after the car was yet again refreshed, it lost its unique steering mechanism. Instead, they relocated it to the standard bottom position. As it turns out, our contemporaries tend to be more interested in the second generation of the Century. That's the one that came out in 1997, packing the 5-liter V12. There aren't a lot of people out there who have information on this car. And there isn't any information on the internet either. Maybe YouTube then? Nope. To get a better understanding of this car, I purchased a few commercial prospects, watched a few YouTube videos in English, I even went to Wikipedia for help. I read the articles there in English, Japanese, but it all turned out to be a waste of time anyway, because in the end, I went out and bought one for myself. I didn't buy myself a Century right away, of course. I went through 37 different Toyotas before finally getting myself one of these, always darting back and forth between sports cars, off-roaders, and luxury cars. Then again, who am I kidding? Choosing and purchasing a car has always been the easy part. The hard part is finding the cash. Even harder is explaining to the wife why there's another rust bucket next to the house. When we found a way to import cars through the south, I nearly went insane. All of a sudden, we had a ton of options for very reasonable money. Athletes, Celsiors, RX-8s, RX-7s, you name it. I was overwhelmed. At first, I even started placing bids on Majestas, Celsiors, and then it hit me. I thought I should get myself a Century. I've always dreamed about owning one. And now that dream suddenly becomes attainable. So I went onto the auctions and started looking into Centuries. This is when I realized that they sell for premium prices. But after looking at the 3-month statistics, I found out that from time to time, Centuries do sell for cheap. Like 2 or 3 cars every 3 months. And so I started placing a few bids. At first I started small, hoping to finally get a hold of one of them Centuries. I laid out 4 criteria. First off, the car had to have a wool interior, no leather. Second, the mirrors had to be mounted on the doors, and not on the fenders. Third, the gear lever had to be floor-mounted, not on the steering column. And finally, the car had to have the dual EMV package. I didn't want the base car without the screens and everything else. So after a week of placing bids, I missed out on 3 cars. The next week I missed 4 cars. Then week 3 rolls around, and it's the same story.
None of my bids were accepted. Most of the cheaper options turned out to be base model cars with leather upholstery. And so here I am thinking that I should probably loosen my criteria. Koista's crown had already been on its way for a few weeks at that point, which meant we'd be flying over to collect his crown, and I wouldn't be picking up my Century. And so finally, someone puts out a dark blue Century onto the auctions, with fender-mounted mirrors, which isn't what I was looking for, with a column shifter, which I didn't want either. However, it was loaded, and it had a wool interior. I placed a bit more money on it than usual, and wouldn't you know it, the next day I'm notified that my bid has been accepted, and that a dark blue Century was heading my way. While I'm on the subject of the gear selector and the mirrors, I wanted the door-mounted mirrors for a specific reason. Those cars came with tiny green lights on the fenders, but you don't get those with the fender-mounted mirrors. As for the column shifter, I was worried that if you were to place it into drive, it would block the TV screen. However, it actually doesn't block the view, and the TV screen is useless anyway, so... As it turns out, I was mistaken on both matters. The fender-mounted mirrors are actually very convenient. You don't have to turn your head back and forth, they're already in your line of sight. I was wrong about the gear selector too. If it were on the floor, I'd have to reach over to grab it, and one of those would definitely get in between you and your lady. The column shifter though, that's a completely different story. If I were to show this car off right after I picked it up, I'd be gleefully telling you about its ideal sound deadening. We're doing 180 Ks and we can literally whisper to each other. About the crazy expensive trim materials. This is genuine wool. Red wood, aluminum. I'd be telling you about the insane ride comfort. Plus I'd be telling you about the outstanding sound system. This thing is fitted with 8 speakers and a factory subwoofer. But the thing is that after driving this car for an entire year, I'm used to all of that. And so today I'm going to tell you about all the little annoyances. When I was looking for data on the Century, I found some information on the Century Royal. Here's the Century Royal, which is the Emperor's car. In 2006, only 4 cars were built based on the regular Century. These 4 cars replaced a fleet of Prince Royals, which had been serving the Japanese imperial court since 1966. Upon turning 40, these cars started to break down due to their old age. Most of the data on the Century Royal is classified. Only a few tidbits are open to the public domain, such as the fact that the headliner is made out of thin rice paper, and it has granite interior side sills. The car is also exempt from Japanese regulations on size and horsepower, which is why it is over 6 meters long and more than 2 meters wide. We can also assume that its 1 GZF motor has more than 280 horsepower. The Century Royal clearly separates the driver and passenger in terms of status, the latter being the Emperor, of course. The same basic principle is evident in normal Centuries as well. For example, the Century doesn't have soft-close front doors, while the Celsior of the same vintage had soft-closed doors all around. Just like you'd expect from a car of this stature, the steering wheel can be electronically adjusted. However, when you remove the key, the wheel doesn't move away from you. Even the Vista had that feature. The front passenger's headrest can be stowed away to provide the main passenger with a bit more comfort. But you have to do that manually. Meanwhile, in Celsiors and Majestas, this function is controlled electronically. There's something strange going on with the window switches as well. Each window can be shut with one touch, but I can't do it from here using my remote. I can lower them by pressing the switch once, but I can't bring them up automatically. It's anybody's guess why they did that. I'm assuming that if I were to raise the window, I could hurt my master's arm. And he wouldn't like that. This wasn't done for the sake of cutting corners, though. This thing costs double the price of a Celsior. We're actually dealing with Japanese mentality. This car distinguishes between those who are sitting up front and in the back in terms of their status. All of this weirdness is a result of choices made by the factory. However, the center console frame peeling away on a car which used to cost 12 million yen is a bit upsetting. On the other hand, something like this wouldn't even bother Mercedes and BMW. To be honest, I'm nitpicking here. Otherwise, there are no flaws in the cabin whatsoever, despite this being a 17-year-old car. So the Century doesn't provide the driver with anything extraordinary. On the contrary, a lot of the comfort features have been intentionally deleted. But that all changes once you climb into the back seat. The left backseat passenger is provided with most of the amenities, if not all of them. The backseat comes with a full array of electronic adjustments, including the headrests and lumbar support, as well as memory settings. We also have heated seats with a massage function, a TV with a VCR and remote control. You can fold the front headrest forward, plus we have plenty of interior lighting. You can adjust the brightness of the dome lights. The car has visors with individual lighting and mirrors. There's even a separate clock back here. Plus the front seat has a cutout for you to stick your feet right underneath the driver's nose.
The rear seat passenger is separated from the outside world by some curtains on the windows and an electric sunshade in the back. The C-pillar is fitted with a special cushion so that you can take a nap during a long road trip. There's also a ton of chrome trim in the cabin, which isn't some plastic knockoff covered in shiny foil. These are actual chrome-plated metal trim bits. These include the rims on the dome lights, the bases of the handles, the rims around some of the buttons. All of these are chrome-plated metal pieces. The door card is fitted with two handles to facilitate opening and closing the door. This handle helps you open the door, while this one is the more convenient one to pull on when closing it. Here we have an elegant ashtray with an aluminum lid and a delicate green backlight. Each ashtray has its own cigarette lighter, and there's another one in the center armrest. Aside from controls for the back seat, the center armrest also has switches for controlling the front passenger seat, given that he does have less authority than the person sitting in the back. Plus you have separate climate controls for the rear section of the cabin. We have a karaoke microphone and an auxiliary socket. This car came equipped from the factory with two telephones. One of them was installed back here, while the other one was hidden up front underneath a power-operated center console lid. Today, however, they're only being used by Pakistanis working at the Yokohama seaport. The B-pillars on both sides have a strap, presumably for storing an umbrella or a cane. This car's cabin complies with the strictest safety regulations. The amount of airbags in here is so huge that I can't even count to that number. Alright, you'll have to excuse me, but it's time for me to watch some cartoon films. At first it might seem as if trunk space isn't too important for a car like this, but considering that this car is being driven in Russia, we simply couldn't disregard it altogether, and the trunk is pretty huge. The load-in height is quite low, plus the floor is perfectly flat, the toolkit is hidden within the right side fender. Enough said. The second-generation Century only came with one motor, albeit in two states of tune. We won't be getting into the CNG variant, considering how few of them were made during their 2-year production run. Here's what I'd like to say to those who are into these sorts of things. The CNG version had considerably less horsepower and torque than the gasoline engine. Why is that? I'm assuming that Japanese engineers are just not on par yet with the Russian CNG conversion chops. Let's get down to business. The 1GZFE is a V12 engine making 280 horsepower. This is the only series production V12 made by a Japanese car maker. It actually holds the Guinness World Record for being the quietest gasoline engine in the world. It's completely devoid of any design flaws. It's powerful, quiet, and reliable. And in Russia, it's considered to be an honorary donor, with people swapping them into Land Cruisers, Supras, and everything in between. I keep hearing that the 1GZ was made using two JZs. Are you people serious? One has an aluminum block, the other's cast iron, timing chain on one hand and belt on the other. It'd make more sense to say that it's made from two 5As and one 3S. The car only came in rear-wheel drive. It came fitted with the trusty old 4-speed A340 automatic. Despite the fact that Toyota was already using 5- and 6-speed autos back then, the 4-speed A340 was used in the Century up until 2006. That's when they replaced it with a 6-speed, which apparently has been proven reliable enough to handle the V12's power output. Although there is one curious caveat. When they started using the 6-speed, Toyota lowered the torque rating by 10%. According to the factory, this was due to new emissions standards, which couldn't be met given the motor's previous specifications. But who knows whether that's true or not. Maybe the new box just couldn't handle 500 Newton-meters of torque. To sum it all up, we're looking at 2,300 kilos, a rear-wheel drive, a big naturally aspirated motor, and a dated gearbox. Let's go for a ride.
The Century is not a race car. Let's talk about the TV screens, or the electronic multivisions as they were. The factory navigation system is obviously useless, and it's pretty much the same story with all Toyotas made before 2004. It keeps showing us that we're in the sea. Then again, all of my complaints are the sorts of things that lemmings would say. The infotainment and lack of steering wheel lift function really don't matter in the grand scheme of things. You might ask how I would sum up a year of owning the Century. The Century is an amazing car. I've read a ton of information about them, and this has been my longtime dream car which I've always idolized, but I'm sure you all know the phrase, never meet your heroes. At first you constantly think about them, and you want to meet with them really badly. Usually after a bit of interaction, you tend to be completely disappointed. But that's not the case here. This car is everything I expected it to be, with the added bonus of Toyota's legendary reliability. The air suspension, for example, doesn't give you a headache like it would in a Range Rover or a Mercedes. Here, it's actually built to last. The airbags are good for over 300,000 kilometers. As for the other suspension bits, the links and ball joints, they're the same as on a 21 series Celsior, which is the JDM equivalent of the LS400. Which means there's a ton of replacement parts at very reasonable prices. Plus, we all know that the electronics, which have always been supplied to Toyota by Denso, tend to be very reliable. And this stands true with the Century as well. This means that none of the backseat accessories will ever fail. As for the engine and gearbox, Kostya already filled you in on those. This is one extremely refined car, with a meaty engine, amazing interior trim materials, without the leather that European perverts love so much. The conservative exterior styling is very nice to look at, given that the bodywork is covered with 7 layers of paint, which looks especially striking in direct sunlight. And let's not forget that the Century is fully built by hand, by Toyota's very best employees. This is an amazing car, one of those that you just fall head over heels for. And now a few words on how common these Centuries are. Obviously nobody brought them over to Russia, since you'd have to pay a ridiculous customs fee for a 5-liter engine, but in Japan this car was far from exclusive. In Tokyo these are all over the place. They even use them as taxis. Which is to say that these cars being unattainable in Japan is no more than a myth. You could easily get one of these, if you had the means. I mean, for the same money you could get yourself 2 200 series Land Cruisers, which aren't too far off in terms of prestige, but happen to be vastly more practical. Time for us to sign out. Hopefully you liked this video. You guys go ahead and subscribe to us on social media. See ya! Check this out, the navigation system has a cool little feature. It shows you a tour guide around Japan. That's how they did it in 2001. It takes a while to load up though. It does work using a DVD after all. There we go. One more time. It lets you choose places of interest. Just have to let it load up. It shows prices and gives you a description. And a few pictures. There we go. Whoever's sitting up front is also going to have to look at this. The screen has a slight pinkish hue to it. I'm guessing I have to clean the electronic contacts in the navigation system module. The Century is not a race car.